Okay, I'd like to call the Plan Commission to order at 6:32. We have Commissioner Kylie Miller, Trustee Lynn, Commissioner Pollock, Commissioner Klein, Commissioner Flynn Post, and President McCaig. Oh, you usually call the roll.
That's fine.
Okay. And Commissioner Wickland may be on his way or may be excused. So I'd like to welcome Trustee Lynn to the Plan Commission. He will be serving as the second village board member in addition to myself in place of Trustee Kudo, who did say that he had enjoyed his tenure on the Plan Commission, but did feel that he wanted to explore some new challenges. And so Trustee Lynn has agreed to serve. So everybody say hello to Trustee Lynn.
Welcome.
Welcome. Wonderful. So item 2 is approval of the April 23rd, 2024 Plan Commission meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Motion by Commissioner Klein, seconded by Commissioner Flynn Post. Any discussion?
On one small correction, I think.
Mhm.
On the first page, item number 3, under the overview, the second paragraph, it says that current code does not allow offices behind the first 20 feet of the storefront. And I'm just wondering, shouldn't that be current code does not allow offices except for behind the first 20 feet, the storefront?
Mm-hmm.
No, I believe that's correct. So the current code does, you could have an office in the back, but not behind the
Right.
first 20 feet. So the first 20 feet is where you can't have that. So current code does not allow offices behind the first 20 feet. The additional space you can. Does that help? Am I still getting it wrong?
Yeah, it should be
It's-
except for the first, behind the first 20 feet.
You can't have them in the first 20 feet.
Right.
Yeah. Are you saying if you're standing on the sidewalk? Behind 20 feet?
It's confusing. We can clarify
Yeah.
it perhaps.
Sounds like the
I-
opposite of.
I
what
see
we
now,
want.
now I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm happy to clarify it.
Okay. So it's
But as long as
it's
we
a-
agree that it,
Yeah,
yeah, okay, yep,
It's
I
a
can
s-
clarify that.
It's a non-substantive cleanup of the language.
once an editor.
Mhm.
always.
I know. Fair enough. Any other discussion regarding the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor with the direction to staff to clean up that one, clarify that one phrase? Say aye.
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 All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries, what are we, 6-0. All right, we have one item of business or one other item of business this evening. Item 3, consideration of recommendation regarding a request by zoning petition to amend the regulations pertaining to principal uses permitted in the MX districts as detailed in 535-25 of the Village of Shorewood zoning code. So as you'll recall, this came before us last month. We went over it in detail. There was a very detailed presentation given by Director Griebentrag. That presentation, that memo is in our packet again, along with the application materials and supporting documentation. The memo, you will notice, has been updated in red for additional information that's been included. I am hoping that there is not an expectation to go through the presentation again, as the Plan Commission did have a thorough discussion at that time. Certainly, Trustee Lynn, since you weren't here, if you have additional technical questions or need clarification on the item this evening, certainly would welcome that. But hoping that everybody has reviewed the information, contacted Director Griebentrag with any questions, and is ready to discuss. We will have a chance for public comment, and then item 3C will be the Plan Commission discussion and recommendation. So any question on the overview, or Director Griepentrag, would you like to summarize the additional material that's included?
I can go briefly. So I attempted to answer any questions that were offered last time, including some information the applicant gave me regarding the North Shore commercial market. As well as I do now have an endorsement from the Business Improvement District that I received this afternoon. I mentioned that in the updated materials as well. And then in speaking with the applicant, I did clarify what a conditional approval might look like. So we have the option to approve as requested or to deny and maintain the current code, but there's also a middle ground. And so within the memo, I did kind of identify what that middle ground could look like and the reasons behind that. So I created a decision tree, which I think is probably in the back of the packet actually, for your general reference that I did talk with the applicant through as well. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions on that. I'm happy to pull it up as well. But I'm hoping that things are pretty straightforward just in terms of process. We are here tonight for a recommendation. There is a public hearing scheduled in front of the village board on June 3rd, at which point then the village board would have the authority to act on it, subject to receiving a recommendation tonight. So hopefully we can get to that point.
Thank you. Any questions for Director Griepentrag? Okay, thank you. For anyone, when we get to discussion, the decision tree is on page 64. I almost think that the last page of the memo is easier to understand. But at this time, I would like, if there's no further questions, technical questions, I would open it up for public comment. Trustee Stokebrand is joining us via Zoom. And we have 3 individuals in the courtroom this evening.
And then I do have
Oh, and then-
I do have the bids official stamped,
Sorry.
as well as one additional citizen that I heard as well.
Okay, and Director Griepentrag has received 2 other communications regarding the topic. All right. Would you like to speak? Okay.
Microphone. Oh, could you use the microphone, Phyllis?
Oh.
Otherwise, Trustee Stokebrand can't hear you.
Yes.
I can.
Yeah, okay. We've been in conversation with Bart for this whole process, and, we're comfortable with the way it's all been presented, and, so we just, of course, we are requesting that you give a positive recommendation to the village board meeting on June 3rd next week, so that we can proceed ahead, because we have somebody ready to lease the space. So
But you don't have any additional information to share this
no,
evening?
because we did get the bid.
Mhm.
They needed some clarification, and Bart, worked with them to get that. And no, we don't really have it. I mean, anything in addition, just that, we would like you to give us a positive outcome. And if you have any questions, Andrew is an expert on real estate, but he is here in the context of representing his mother, who's my business partner, Valerie Stefanich. So.
Wonderful, thank you. Director Griepentrag?
Sure, I can, I'll just read we did receive one other citizen comment from Paul Geenan of 3900 North Estabrook Parkway, apartment 449, who simply says, Mr. Griepentrag, I support the proposed zoning amendment for 4485 North Oakland Avenue. Pretty straight and forward. Then this afternoon, as I've mentioned, I did attend a bid meeting last week or the week before, just to kind of give an overview of what I've given you as well. Just because once again, this is kind of complicated for people that don't do it day to day. And so they took some time to think about it, and their responses were due to the executive director by noon today, at which point she submitted the following. To whom it may concern, I'm writing this letter on behalf of the Shorewood Business Improvement District Board in support of a proposed zoning amendment with conditions regarding Shorewood zoning regulation in the MX district. The majority of Shorewood Bid Board supports amending the current zoning with conditions similar but not limited to those included in the village of Shorewood's decision tree. The Shorewood bid is dedicated to attracting and retaining businesses to our community and believes that an amendment with conditions would be of assistance to that task. If you have any questions or need further information, please feel free to contact me kindly. Janet Henning, Executive Director, Shorewood Bid. So once again, they are suggesting that they are comfortable with a conditional or an amendment with clauses as I've presented three various options. There could be other ones as well, but as I'm reading this, they're not in favor of a full-on opening of the code, but that's just my interpretation.
Thank you. Trustee Stokebrand, did you want to speak at this time? No? Okay, thank you. All right, we'll now move on to police commission, plan commission discussion of this item. I guess to keep things clear, I mean, we can have a go around and see what people are comfortable with. What I'm trying to guard against is a mixing of metaphors. So the difference between opening up the code and sort of approving the application as is would mean that it would be available, that change would apply to all MX districts. The conditional clauses that are presented would apply and make this situation favorable, but also sort of keep the code that was approved last year somewhat intact. So I want to just be mindful of those two different positions, that we need to take an action or to deny, but those are three very different things. So at this time, if we could go around and share kind of where people are at as far as what they're in favor of, then we would know if we needed further discussion before taking a vote. Barbara
Can I
Kyler?
start?
Yes, please.
I will admit that all the real estate information that you provided in our packet kind of went over my head. Not being in that business, I wasn't sure, does this support the applicant? Does it say, hey, they should have been able, so I wasn't quite sure what to make of that. As far as the possibilities, the conditions, we had talked about a couple different things, but we've apparently decided we're not going to say mental health is medical offices and that we should allow those, just that we'll keep mental health in an office, but have it limited in the storefront space. Is that correct?
Correct. The applicant is seeking an allowance for a mental health practitioner, which in our current code is defined as an office use, not as a medical clinic. So the application that we're here reviewing and continue to discuss relates solely to offices. You could, of course, make a recommendation to expand that, but I'm responding to the application on file.
I do like the compromise that has been presented, especially like for a long building like this, where we take a percentage where we do allow that kind of use, as long as it's not on a corner position. I think that would be a good compromise.
Thank you. Commissioner Flynn Post?
Yeah, I'm in favor of a middle approach. But what I'm stuck on a little bit is the pedestrian experience. And just because we did all of that work on the zoning code update, in talking about this whole active spaces from the streetscape. So, I'm wondering what's possible in terms of office space with use of windows. Is it possible for us to think about this in a way that separates the use from the windows, from the bricks of the buildings? Maybe that's too complicated.
I don't think it's too complicated, and I apologize, I don't have this memorized, or I should have at least looked into it earlier today, but I do know that the code, has restrictions on shelves and closed blinds and things. I believe it's for the first 3 feet of active space. So even if it were an office, they can't just simply block their windows without facing, zoning violations. So we don't have a check where we, approve a floor plan per se. But if we were to see that happen, we would send a letter to the applicant saying, you cannot simply block off your windows. I will admit that's a very, very difficult thing for staff to enforce, just because, it's sunny at times and if the blinds need to be closed, they need to be closed. But if it's more of a permanent, blocking off with file cabinets, things like that, that we're easily able to send a letter on doing that. So I don't know that that fully answers your question, but the zoning code does have prohibitions on blocking off windows to a certain degree. Blinds will always be difficult, but furniture, we as staff can easily send a letter should we find that condition to be the case.
Also have a question about how many buildings do we have that are not longer in scale? We, in any way, from an economic development perspective, privileging a larger building over a smaller storefront that might want to become office? Is that an issue?
I mean, you're definitely treating, in this scenario, you're definitely allowing a longer office space to have more options. The justification with that is that they also need to provide more, they also have to get more tenant space leased. So there is definitely a consideration of allowing an office in longer office buildings in exchange for recognizing that they have to lease out a lot of space. Whereas a smaller building, we're suggesting that a smaller tenant, is more likely, you're more likely to find one smaller tenant than 6 tenants to fill a building. So that's where that was written. But yes, you are correct that you are giving a longer building more opportunity to find at least a certain percentage of their users.
That's something that I'm thinking about, just where our conversation landed seemed like we were getting into a little bit of a semantical discussion about office space versus medical. And then there were some great points that were brought up about, do we want this to be strictly retail versus restaurant versus medical services? I mean, we could have a whole in-depth discussion about economic development as far as, do we want more salons? Do we want, certain types of businesses? And I feel like that's not something that,
Mhm.
so that's right.
Thank you. Commissioner Klein?
Well, I enjoyed all the data person. It's fascinating to me. But similar, I didn't know if this was good or bad with respect to us changing code to create a situation. So, part of me struggles with accommodating a single situation and impacting the code. But it also, I think we found a good compromise in the middle to do the right thing.
Thank you. Commissioner Pollak?
Yeah, I need to know. I really hate.
So you're not in support of changing it? Correct. Okay. Trustee Lynn?
Thank you. Yeah. So, my thoughts kind of come back to when we first approved the code overall. And this was one of the biggest sticking points throughout the whole process, of restricting what businesses, can be in the village by restricting what can be in the first 20 feet of a building. I think this is a situation where, we want to encourage as many businesses and operations as we can in the village. We don't want empty storefronts. And I think, empty storefronts is worse than an office in a place that maybe potentially could have a storefront, but doesn't, or maybe never has in the past. So I would be in favor of the straight yes vote, the first option. I think that'd be the easiest. I think that would just set the code at a clear, understandable, even though it is a change from what was done, it would just set it into one standard place as opposed to the middle option. If that's not where we want to go, if other people would prefer the middle option, I would just ask that we have that be very clear as to what those different unique circumstances are. But my preference would be for the straight yes vote.
Thank you. So my position on this is, I would support a yes, as presented, or the compromise, or the conditional. The reason being, I think I said this at the last meeting, was that I felt like this was, for the size of our community, the focus on this building, it almost felt like regulating to specific buildings rather than sort of types of buildings in a larger area. So I feel like that's where the hybrid zoning code kind of let us down in a way, because it gave us the idea in theory that you could, you know, sort of regulate these things and it could work in your favor. However, based on my experience living here for 20 years and being on the board for all these years, I just haven't seen that regulating to that extent does move the needle, if it were, in terms of driving what kind of businesses open up in different spaces. So I didn't make a bigger deal about that last year when when it came to us as it was, because I really appreciated all of the hours and hours and hours that went into getting us the code. And I didn't take those hours to be in the small groups and to argue my point. And so I went. But given that a year has gone by and this situation has emerged, it kind of validates what I felt at that time. And my experience being in Shorewood, where we're almost a city, but we're not a city, and all those kinds of things. So I think that either of those alternatives do address the problems with the code, because I think that it will continue to occur. And so for that reason, I would support a yes as presented, but I would also, if we couldn't get there with a majority, I would support the conditional.
Can I add one more little piece? You know, if we were to proceed with a no, you know, this question would come to us again at some point, which is fine. And if that's what we want, that's fine, to be prepared for that. But if we proceed with a yes, we'll never get a question like this again. You know, the reverse, I should say, won't occur, because a restaurant's not going to come to us and say, oh, we, you know, don't want to be next to an office or something like that. So, you know, I could see with a yes, just making it a little more clear.
Yeah, that reminded me of one other thing, but Commissioner Pollak?
Isn't that exactly what's gonna happen? Like now, don't like the zoning, I'm asked for an exception.
True, but what's the exception that's now being asked, because we're no longer excluding one type of business?
No, anybody who doesn't like the code as it currently exists can just come up with like, oh, well, corners shouldn't count. This building shape shouldn't count. This is the first challenge we've had. And I'm nervous about
Sure, I definitely
inviting a
understand
lot
that.
of challenges.
Yeah, for me, it's hard for me to separate out the circumstances, because we would have heard from this owner, this property owner at that time if the notices had been received. So there are a couple of, and so it's likely that the group would have gotten some more disagreement. It may not have ended up the same way. I guess there's also a very practical aspect about this. Again, I live right on Oakland, essentially. I walk you know, I do all my errands on foot, as I know that, you know, you do as well. And the reality is that what's in the different spaces doesn't affect me on a daily basis at the end of the day. And all of these things, like I've heard people say, well, Ascension, you know, you wouldn't want that. Well, I literally live right across the street from Ascension, and it really doesn't affect my day. When I had that healthcare, I could go right across the street to my doctor's office, and I love that. So again, I just have to say, from a very, again, I really appreciate the theory, the practice, the contemplation around all this, and all the data that supports code in general, and taking this step. But if we're trying to balance on a day-to-day level, and to be, because the reality is we do live in a very condensed place where it's like the impact of the code is felt so much more strongly, because there's literally like one or two buildings in, you know, anyway, I'm being extreme. But that was another thing that I just wanted to say, as somebody who is out in front of these buildings all the time. I really appreciate the vision, but I also have to say that at the end of the day, practicality means a lot too, and keeping people in the village, engaged in the village, doing business in the village is really important. Okay.
two other things.
Commissioner Miller.
Just to remind us that we're just making a recommendation to the village board.
Yep.
So we could say, no, we're keeping it the way that is. And then on June 3rd, the village board could say, we're going to change it. So,
Mhm.
you know, there was still a chance that it would come, get
Mhm.
approved. Secondly, I agree with President McKay that was wonderful for us to put forth in the commercial code, the kinds of businesses and activities we wanted, but the market is a beast of its own. I mean, you know, the Bonobo restaurant, we were probably all hoping another restaurant would go in there, but no, it's a retail space, and the furniture store that's there took out that bar, nice bar. But so you can't really control, unless you've got the capital to go in, you can't really control, you know, what's going to happen in spaces to every extent.
Mhm.
So I think that, you know, it's a good, this amendment isn't totally throwing out what we wanted to do before, but it's making it more feasible for property owners to lease their space.
At this time, we could, if more discussion is needed, otherwise I would take a motion.
I have another question just about the amendment that we're discussing. Are we discussing this that's being brought forward? I'm looking through my packet of 65 pages.
Yeah.
Are we discussing the amendment that's being brought forward by the resident, or this question of the decision? Are they a little bit different?
So yeah, I have the decision tree. I also have, to President McKegg's point, the end of my memo has 3 possible motions. The first motion would completely support the applicant's request. The second motion would deny the request. The third one would be the one that would, you know, put conditions or seek a compromise on where that is. I believe it's page 11 of 65.
Thank you.
And just to clarify that the one with the clauses, there are 3 types of clauses. You could want one, you could want all 3, you could want a different one. I'm just throwing out there something that would work in this case. But once again, that could be calibrated in many different fashions. But yeah, the first 2 are easier. The third one requires a little more nuance, obviously.
Yes.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I motion to recommend approval of an amendment to permit office uses within the first 20 feet of occupied space in the MX district in buildings with at least 120 linear feet of primary frontage, so long as those uses, not including a lobby, occupy no more than 90 linear feet or 50% of the frontage along the primary facade, whichever is less, and are not located within 60 linear feet from the street corner.
Is there a second?
I'll
I'll-
second.
Okay. There's a motion from Commissioner Kylie Miller with a second from Commissioner Klein. Any discussion?
Just to revisit a question from earlier, is this too nuanced in that it could create more exclusion and favoritism of certain businesses, or is that not really a problem with this? Because I don't want to exclude.
I don't think it relates to excluding businesses. It would exclude
Okay.
certain buildings from having this option. So once again, the longer buildings that are required to lease out more space, find more tenants, it would give them the first break in terms of opening up office uses to those without saying that, you know, the smaller buildings. This version acknowledges that there's more commercial space in longer buildings, and therefore it's more difficult for them to find the number of tenants to occupy that space. So
Okay, so it's acknowledging a reality, basically.
correct.
Okay,
But you are picking winners and losers.
Correct.
It's zoning.
Zoning does, correct.
okay.
How many
That's
ones?
my question. That's my concern. And we could amend the motion.
Bart, can you remind me how many buildings are long at beyond 120 within the MX one?
I don't have a specific number. Crystal and I did measure them on whatever date was.
Sorry,
It's like 6 to 8.
6 to 8. Okay, that's good enough.
Yeah, I
President
think it is. Oh, Trustee Stokebrand?
Hi, I'm sorry, would it be possible for me to ask a question at this point?
Sure.
I'm just wondering, as someone who sat through all those meetings, I believe with Ms. Flynn and Mr. Pollack, does the applicant feel that the biggest problem is the zone change, the category, or the retail space requirement? That is, if the 20-foot measurement for retail was different, presumably larger, would that have made it easier to find a tenant or to sell the space? I just want to make sure that if we're looking at fixing a quote unquote problem, that that's indeed what we're doing. And apologies if you already discussed this, because I have to say, recently a large game store opened on Downer across from UWM. It's really big. And I don't know, I'm a bad judge of space, but boy, wouldn't that have been nice to have that in that space? And so I'm wondering why it's not, and none of us know the answer here probably, unless the real estate professionals do. But I just want to make sure that if we go at this, are we going at the real problem here? Is the real problem no offices, or is it that required retail space 20 feet from the storefront? Thank you.
Hi, Andy Stefanich, 790 North Water Street, Suite 1800, Milwaukee 53202. So the challenge has really been just retail in general. We had 2 retail brokers, 1 office broker working on this assignment for over 2 years. We got 1 proposal from 1 retailer the entire time. That was for a group that wanted 1,800 square feet. It's a healthy retail market right now. It's just for this location, this space, the size really is a detriment. There's not that many retailers that want 5,000 square feet. Dividing it makes it so much more expensive, and just doesn't make sense economically on top of the $40 a square foot to white box it. So really it's the only proposal we've gotten have been for office tenants. I hope, does that answer that question, or?
From your perspective, yes, it does. And Trustee Stokebrand, that'll be a good point to bring up at the village board as well, since we'll be entertaining it there. So I do think that it's fair to larger buildings do have more space to manage, and so I don't think that it's from a practical standpoint, I think that acknowledging that and providing some flexibility or a lever is completely reasonable. Yes.
I think because this has been an office space, it doesn't seem like that much of a stretch. And from what we heard at the previous meeting, it seemed pretty financially onerous than to kind of wipe out the offices and make it ready for a retail space of any size to go in. That was kind of the sticking point that I got from last time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like it's not like we're taking a retail space and making it into an office.
Mm-hmm.
Although that could happen in the future,
Mm-hmm.
you know, with this amendment, but.
Okay, further discussion?
Could use the microphone, Phyllis, so Trustee Stokebrand can hear your response. Thanks.
That building was bought by somebody who put the business in. It wasn't an outside
Yeah, tenant. Mhm.
business
Mhm.
that was let leased to a building owner.
Mhm.
So I think it makes a big difference. Plus, this is a person, the Chakotas, who are in the real estate business
Mhm.
and have been for like 35 or 40 years.
Mhm.
They're in a very, very different situation
Mhm.
than we were in which we had we financed our own office when we were using it. And now, it's a completely different situation. So, it's not that the idea, I mean, obviously, every situation is unique, but I don't want to, I
Right.
don't think that we could have attracted that use
Mhm.
because that owner did this for his own
Business. Yeah.
business
Mhm.
that he developed.
Yep, a wise bid director told me once, every vacancy has a story, every building has a story, every business has a story. So we do our best. Yes, Commissioner
Barn.
Pollack.
My big concern is what happens downstream. They let one in, is the middle option, do you see helping mitigate that anymore? I feel like once you, damn, it's just gonna. Y'all have an experience.
Yeah,
have thought of
I would suggest that none of these three options are going to stop another request from someone else. I mean, I've been here for 7 years and Board of Appeals applications are pretty constant, so we're kind of used to, accepting the reality of people, wanting their request heard. And so, yes, whether or not they're all successful and that sends a message, that's a different story. But I don't anticipate people not wanting to challenge this in the future as well. It'll be a matter of how successful it proves in the district. So when people see the success of it, if other businesses open up and they say, yeah, look, we are attracting this type of business. So I can't play crystal ball on that. I expect that people will apply either way.
You don't think it affects?
I mean, on some level, I'm sure, I think the outcome affects it more so than, actually, I don't know. Because people do Board of Appeals after they know that other people lost it too. So I think if there's a financial impact on them, they have no problem, attempting to change the code or to get what they need. So I'm using the Board of Appeals as an example, but yes, that does not seem to limit people from, trying, because in their financial pro forma, a $500 application or $200 application is not the bigger hurdle.
Thank you.
All right, can we take a vote? Okay, all those, this doesn't have to, is it a roll call or just all those in favor of, well, would you like to read the motion again?
Barbara, I don't think you changed it, so.
I didn't.
Barbara motioned to recommend approval of an amendment to permit office uses within the first 20 feet of occupied space in the MX district in buildings with at least 120 linear feet of primary frontage, so long as those uses, not including a lobby, occupy no more than 90 linear feet or 50% of the frontage along the primary facade, whichever is less, and are not located within 60 linear feet from the street corner.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No,
So one.
just one.
Any abstentions?
That's me.
Oh.
I abstain.
You abstain. All right, so we have 4 yay, 1 nay, and 1 abstention.
Yes.
All right, so the nays have it. And now it will go to the village board on June 3rd for consideration. Future items? Item 4, future agenda items? Yes.
Once again, this may or may not be the place to announce this, but I think it is worth noting. We are being required to update our floodplain ordinance, zoning ordinance. There are new floodplain maps that have been adopted, and all communities in Milwaukee County are required to update their ordinance by October. The DNR has reached out to us to provide a draft for us to review and confirm. Whether that draft is available before June is a good question. So I'm thinking probably more July, August kind of thing, but we do need to have that recommended by the Plan Commission and adopted by the board by October, or we would risk, not being eligible for flood insurance in the village. So it's not going to be a huge change. I don't think any of the maps in Shorewood changed. It's just going to be a matter of identifying the new date of the approved maps to make sure our ordinance is in line. So thankfully, the DNR, they know this is a big task that they're more familiar with. They've offered to provide us with that draft. If I get it by June, I'd be happy to start that conversation. But it could be July. It's definitely before August.
Thank you. And not a future item, but on Thursday night, there's a combined meeting of the village board and the CDA. The Plan Commission is strongly encouraged to attend, although there is no decision-making responsibility. But certainly your input pertaining to the future of affordable housing is very much welcomed at that time. All right, if there is no other future items, we would take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion to adjourn by trustee Lynn, seconded by Commissioner Pollock. Any objections? Hearing none, we stand adjourned at 7:12. Thank you.